It's hard to make new friends. But making enemies, I guess that's easy. We got 4 problems. We saw their faces. We know their names. Know what they're capable of. They'll find us again. They'll find you and finish the job. Unless you find them first.
Aaron, it's a good time to be a gamer right now.
Yes, it is.
There is a lot of really, really excellent stuff coming out. And for my money, one of the things that I don't know if other people are excited about, but I love Bastion so goddamn much that I was on the edge of my seat. I would have been hard-pressed if Dark Souls 2 and Well, no, I'm not going to finish that statement.
I was about to say, hold on.
So, folks, we're talking about, we're going to do a little review here for Transistor, the latest game from Supergiant Games, the dudes that made Bastion. One of my favorite games of the last, 2 or 3 years. Best, really good soundtrack. But I'm not going to spend this entire review licking Bastion's butt. Let's talk about Transistor. So this game has a lot of style and it's got a lot of heart.
Yeah.
It's the story of your main character is this woman named Red. And you find this out in the first 10 minutes of the game. So Red has had her voice stolen, and she has picked up this kind of weird futuristic sword-looking thing called the Transistor that is will not shut up.
No.
And I feel bad. I feel like if Red had a voice, she might just be like, dude,
I know. I get it.
Just
that way.
5 minutes.
Oh. Just let me sit here for a little bit.
And so, it's funny because that setup could really take place in just about any world. But the world of Transistor is one of the things that makes it so interesting, because you've got this very colorful, very bright, kind of futuristic, it's a 3D isometric world, and everything is, we've talked a lot, I've talked before about getting fatigued with browns and grays.
Yeah.
And this game just does not do that at all.
Like, oh, you don't like brown? You don't like gray? Cool.
That's
All
right.
Here's
How about
rainbow.
Yeah. How about gold? How about, of course, I tell you what, it does.
Bronze. And
it does kind of conform a little bit to that blue and orange Hollywood thing they've got going on. But the whole game takes place in this city in what I would assume is the future that is 10 different types of weird.
Not so distant future.
There's all these public terminals that you can go to, and there's one of them where you go up and it's like, hey, what kind of weather do you want today? Like, they're taking a vote. Like, Twitter gets to pick whether it's rainy or not today.
It's like almost Demolition Man-esque.
Yeah. And so in this game, Red she's singing, she's doing her thing, and these dudes called the camarada show up, and they it's not entirely clear because there's this weird cutscene. It looks like they throw the transistor sword at Red, and then
they do try to take her out.
Yeah,
they completely try to take her out,
but instead somebody jumps in the way, and that's the voice of the transistor that you hear throughout the entire game. This unknown kind of dude who
has a really cool ass voice.
Yeah,
he has a really cool ass voice.
He's the narrator from Bastion, and he plays as a transistor. But it's not just him. As you go on through the game, you actually end up picking up all of these different personalities of people and incorporating them into the transistor, and those people represent the individual attack powers that you use, which is really crazy. And so your main antagonist in this game is that the camarada have let loose. The process.
Yes,
I swear to God, there's so many cool names in this game.
It's like they had a wheelboard of just badass names.
Yeah,
and they just spun it, and it's just like, what are we gonna call the bad guys? Just call them a process.
Yeah. I mean, just the name the camarada should sound really stupid, but it doesn't. It doesn't for some reason,
especially when you see them.
Yeah,
that's another thing for me. The design of this game, it's like the artwork was what really drew me to it, because it is gorgeous.
Yeah.
It is completely gorgeous. And being, as some of you, if you remember, I love swords.
Yeah.
And the design of the sword is a design I've never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, hey, what is this giant buster sword looking thing?
Yeah.
But in the end, it's like just, and like also I'm a big fan of the details. So when Red's running around and the sword is so big, she has to drag it.
Yeah.
And so it leaves this little like trail on the ground, like it's slicing through whatever the surface. It's
fantastic.
It's gorgeous.
So from there, you're basically trying to track down the camarada. It's a pretty standard revenge thing, and it all along or all throughout the process is essentially taking over and kind of destroying the world. So you're looking to stop them, you're looking to stop the camarada, all at the same time. Now, all of that story is told essentially through narration that comes from the sword because your character has no voice. There's a few parts in the game where you're interacting with those terminals, where your character can type stuff, and so there's actually a couple of segments where your character is typing like on what would essentially be like a forum message response, but she's having a conversation with the transistor with the sword through that. And there's actually the whole game is peppered with all of these little moments where you can go up to the getting backstory of the world through these terminals. You can also go up to like there's a place early on where you get to a poster and it kind of cuts to this like still image, gorgeous image of Red looking at the poster and Transistor talking to her about what's going on. In fact, it's actually one of those things that I've never seen in a game before. And before we go into the mechanics, it's worth talking about. So part of this story is the love story between the sword and Red.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you can do, I played this on the PS4. This is PS4 and PC, but one of the things that you can actually do on the PS4 that's really cool is you can switch it so that the sword is actually talking out of your controller, out of the speaker on your controller.
Shock 4.
Yeah, and the light on the front of it pulses in the same light as the sword when they're talking, which is really interesting because what you've got at that point is you kind of got this analog for the transistor in your hands. But what the sword is saying is it's talking to this woman about how much it loves her and stuff.
Yeah.
And then that's coming at you, and you're kind of like, I don't really feel the same way.
Yeah,
DualShock 4.
So, I mean, I love you, PlayStation, but I don't love you. I got to go to bed soon, all right?
It's just interesting that I remember when Remember Me came out, they talked about how they had a hard time finding a publisher because it was a story about a woman, and part of the love interest there was with a man, and they were like, well, male gamers won't be able to appreciate that. And I was like, that's crazy. But I'll be honest and say that there were some points in here where the relationship between the Transistor and Red is so personal that there were some cases where I was kind of like,
third wheel.
Yeah, I was just like, I'm gonna go make a sandwich. You guys have this conversation.
I'm gonna
right back.
Put this controller down right here.
Now,
I'll be right back.
Part of that could be because I was a robot sent from the future to destroy all humanity.
Correct.
I don't like to see that sort of stuff, but it's a very charming story.
What is love?
That's right. That's backed up by a really very cool game mechanic, and that is that you have in the Transistor. It's like, okay, the Transistor has 4 attacks. You've got all 4 of the face buttons,
triangle, circle, X, square,
that you can map to attacks, and then you've got a whole series of programs that go into the Transistor. Like you've got one that's a short slash, you get one that's a long slash. You get stuff like a teleport. Stuff that bounces, bombs, and stuff like that. Yeah. But you can mix and match them.
You also get a dog.
Yes. I didn't even realize that until like halfway through the game.
It's a dog.
It's a dog.
It's a dog.
It's a dog.
Yeah.
But what you can do is that you can mix and match those things. So, for example, like you've got your basic slash, right? Mm-hmm. It's called crash. And when you hit enemies with the crash, it'll actually weaken them to other attacks. And that's intrinsic to that. So you can take that, and then you can put, like, say, the bounce one as a sub-program on that. And then whenever you hit an enemy with your sword, it'll bounce that hit to people that are nearby. Conversely, you can also have the bounce one as the primary in that slot, so that when you hit an enemy, that attack will bounce to other enemies. That does the base damage of the bounce,
weakening them.
but then by putting crash in there, it'll weaken each one of them. So it starts out very simple, but it gets very interesting when you get things like there's a function that lets you turn enemies to be on your side. And through the back half of the game, I put that on dash, because what would happen is that whenever you dash through an enemy to get away from other enemies, it would momentarily turn them to your side and create confusion. You get the things like summon the dogs. For example, summon the dog, that power, there's another power that you have that's like a multi-hit power, where if you hit somebody with it, it'll break off a couple of other like sub-grenades to hit people. Well, if you attach that to the dog summon power, then you get 2 dogs instead of 1 dog. So there's just a metric shit ton of different ways to mix
chemistry.
and match. Yeah. What's also cool is that each one of the powers is so you've got your primary slots, you got your secondary slots, and you've got passive powers.
Yes.
But each one of the powers is a personality that has a bio, and the way that there's 3 tiers of their bio, and the way that you unlock those is by using them as a primary, secondary, or passive. So to get everything out of the game, you want to keep switching stuff up. There's also a meter that that each one of these powers has a point cost, and you can't go above a certain point cost. And then as you level up, you'll unlock new powers, you'll unlock more slots, you'll unlock more secondary slots and stuff like that. There's also a whole system like there was in Bastion where it also unlocks, I think they call them limiters, where you can basically set these things to make the game harder. Or it'll be like, all enemies have a shield now, but you get 4% more XP from all enemies. And you can turn those on kind of on and off at will.
And yes, if this is sounding like a lot, it actually is, but also at the same time, when you complete the game, you can do New Game Plus. Which is awesome. And so there's endless combinations that you can do of like, for me, I like to play through a game with a certain thing as primary and secondary, or like I'm only going to use this stat tree. But then if I can play the game again, what does this stat tree do? So like this game gives you the beautiful option of going through it a certain way and then being able to completely do it again. But also at the same time, if you don't want to wait till the new game, you can just start mixing and matching.
At certain times in the map, you come across these little stations that'll let you just respec. And it's also worth noting that there are no bad combinations
at all.
They're all useful in some way. They're just going to change how you play. The other part, of course, is combat. Is you run around in real time doing this stuff, but then when the enemies show up, it'll wall off a section of the area as an arena, and you have another bar. Like you could run up to guys and hit them, just hit the button to hit them with your sword, but that's not really what you want to do
at all.
You hit the R2 button, and it basically gives you kind of like a weird hybrid turn-based thing. Where
in a way, it's. I forgot what the actual like vision is called. It's not X-ray, but it completely changes the way the game looks.
It goes to like kind of a weird computer gritty kind of thing.
Until you've actually like picked what you wanted to do, and then once you do it, it executes it for you back into like the real time stuff.
And in the beginning, a lot of times you can take care of enemies without actually having to rely on that system. But as time goes on, you start getting a lot of enemies that you'll get like enemies that'll buff other enemies, or you'll get enemies that phase in and out of existence, and so you have to use
smart.
that, catch them at the right time.
Be smart and figure out who to take out first.
And whenever you use that power, there's a recharge timer on it before you can use it again. And during that time, you can pick like 1 or 2 things that you want to be able to use in that time, but a lot of your attack functions are disabled until that timer comes back up. So it ends up being really interesting. I think that there was a real possibility that this could have gotten very stale, but they keep introducing new enemies that do new different things that force you to reevaluate the strategy that you're using. It's just your standard run up and attack no longer works. So now you want to summon guys or turn people to your side, or use debilitating programs or functions to make their attacks less and things like that.
And it's just a cool ass looking game. I'm sorry I keep bringing that up. It's just really just visually it's interesting and it doesn't get boring. And I think when the combat starts, because that each area gets blocked off, but it gets blocked off in a certain way in which you have to adapt to it.
Yeah.
In which you can hide behind things, but just know that those things can get blown up.
Right.
And so you can send your dog, but just know your dog can die.
Yeah.
And so it's like you really have to adapt to what enemy you're fighting and like where you're fighting and how you're going to fight them, like continually.
I mean, I even be when you talk about the look of the game, I would be willing to say I don't think I've ever seen a game that looks like this before.
No.
Like the art style is just so creative. It's such a combination of kind of future and Baroque architecture and kind of weird. Like there's motorcycles, but there's also
bridges and skyscrapers. But yeah, and then it's very, like you said, Baroque. It's very that's the kind of artscape it is.
Yeah. Now
I know
that
they
is
had a huge jazz influence, and so that's a lot of like I know like not a set rhythm, so things are off to certain people, but I think that works perfectly in this situation for the game.
Yeah, it moves along. It's only about 8 hours.
Yeah.
6 to 8 hours, depending on how completionist you are in it. And there's plenty of, I mean, like they have there's an area, there's like a hub area that's this beach that you'll keep running into doors that go to it. And there's a bunch of challenge maps where they'll give you
it's got a good amount of trophies.
Kill these guys with one, you've got one turn to destroy all these guys, or survive for 2 minutes without dying. And the penalty for dying is weird. Is whenever you get your health all the way down, it gives you what they call an emergency turn that you get to. It goes into that turn-based mode, and then if you still get hit after that, it'll randomly deactivate one of your functions, and you have to hit like a certain number of little checkpoints before it reactivates.
Keeps you busy.
Yeah,
it keeps you busy.
Well, the nice thing about it is that they'll like let's say that your dash gets turned off, right?
Yeah.
You can still put something else in that slot that's just not dash for a little while, so it never grinds the game all the way to a halt.
Right.
It just puts you at a slight disadvantage for a couple of fights, which I find to be, there were a couple times where I was on the ropes and I thought like, oh shit, I'm going to have to revert to my last checkpoint, but it's like, no, just keep moving.
Yeah.
Now there are a couple of things, I mean, just as a comparison to Bastion, which I don't like to judge the game fully on other games, but I found the narration by the Transistor to be good. I didn't find it to be. There didn't seem like there was as much of the kind of conditional dialogue that you saw in Bastion, where it was talking specifically about what was going on at the time. Like I would have really liked, especially because the functions in your sword each had a personality
to show it.
Yeah, when you go in, you can hit this button to look at that information. It's a big screen of text, but I think I really would have preferred if the sword would have taken more time, because there's a lot of downtime where you're just running around, right? Yeah. Where it would have filled some of that with some more dialogue talking about those individual people, those individual functions, that sort of thing. Also, there's a lot, I mean, for people who like every last thing spelled out story-wise, this story doesn't exactly do that. There's a lot of ambiguity. In fact, the main story about the process is kind of background to the personal story of Red and the Transistor. So if you're looking for, like, the camarada, what they're doing, it's never really entirely clear why they're doing what they're doing.
You got to fill in some blanks yourself.
They've got some really kind of, they say some cryptic, nice-sounding cryptic bullshit. You're just like, what? In fact, the last battle in the game, I was like, why am I doing this? What's going on here? I don't understand. All right, whatever. It's fine.
All right, I'll just do it.
It's fine. It's fine. I felt like Darren Korb does the music again here. And I feel like the music is good, but it's a little bit more like when I played Bastion, there were times where the music would come on and I would just be like, holy fuck, this is incredible. I want the soundtrack. Here, it was very good. It was better than your stock music. I never got like in Bastion, the different places that you went, they were the flavor of the different areas was very different, so there was very different music to accompany it. Here, you're running through one contiguous city, and there are differences in the places that you go to, but they're not supremely different.
Yeah, and so the music doesn't change up as drastically.
Yeah, it's good. It's just not it's not quite as good as
that soundtrack bumping in your car good.
Right. Like there were areas in Bastion where I would get finished and I'd find myself humming that song.
Right. Yeah.
I don't really remember as much about the music going on here.
I think there's like some trumpets.
Yeah.
So it's not trumpets, saxophone.
Yeah.
Saxophone.
I gotta say, I mean, once again, it bears repeating that the visuals are just absolutely stunning. I mean, when you're running around the world, the whole thing is from kind of a 3/4 down view, so you see, the front and the side of all the buildings that you're looking at. There are, like I said, there's some optional things. There's some hidden encounters. I gotta say that the world, that once you get into the habit of you're going to run into some flavor text, the sword's going to talk to you for a little while, you're going to run into an arena, it's going to close off, you're going to fight guys, you're going to go on. It did become a little bit more repetitive, and and once again, I don't like to just harp on the last game these guys made, but in Bastion, you had 2 weapons. You had a main weapon, a sub-weapon.
Yeah.
Here, with 4 slots to fill, there's just less incentive to change.
Right.
Especially when you find something good. Like, they will start presenting enemies that have more that make your current loadout not work as well, so you'll have to rethink it.
More resistant to.
But when I was in Bastion, I think every single time I went back to their hub, I would switch weapons just to see
what it would do.
Right.
Yeah.
There's also not as much upgrading of the individual. Like, you got Crash, right? Crash is always Crash. It never upgrades to Crash 2.0. It never. You can't change that stuff, which didn't. I don't know. Like the depth in the game is really in the combinations, which means that it's like you don't ever get upgrades to like your health or upgrades to how fast your thing recharges, or there's no equipment in the game because it's all in the transistor.
Yeah,
it's fine. It's just it's a little bit lightweight, and I like a little bit more depth in that stuff. But for what it is, and for a 6 to 8 hour game, no big whoop. Like you said, there is a new game plus, as there is an incentive to go back through it.
Yeah. It got it got. I mean,
I don't know if I really feel the need to go right back through the game as soon as I got done with it.
It's not one of those games that you finish and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to play that again, but I want to do this because I know I missed something, or I just want to try something out. It's one of those games you play, you're like, man, that was actually pretty sweet. Shelf it for a little bit.
Right.
And then it's just one of those games where you're like, you know what I feel like playing? Let me jump on Transistor a little bit.
Yeah, it'd be the kind of game,
You're not going to like sit down and like want to like, I got to keep going. Right. After you get through it.
Yeah.
Because the first playthrough, you're going to, it is intriguing and it does look good. And then all the things you can do with all the different abilities that you get. Yeah, that helps it keep going. But, the new game plus, it's usually for, the trophy whore.
Right.
or just the person who just loved the game so much that they have to jump right back in it again and just keep getting stuff. But it wasn't that way for me. But
yeah. Well, so I think that's about all I got. The game did crash on me one time.
Oh.
But it's the first time on my PS4 I've ever seen a game crash. Just crashed out, boom, loaded it back up, didn't have any problems.
Right.
So I don't know if other people have been seeing that, but it's just worth noting. I think at the end of the day, I'm going to give this one 4 out of 5. As it's good, it's not the best. It's worth the money and it's worth your time. It just doesn't. It just didn't strike me. It's striking in certain ways. It just didn't strike me as hard as
the previous,
as Bastion did. And I don't want to. Like I said, I don't want to. I'm not comparing it. I'm not making that score directly because of Bastion, but it's a good game. It's a great game. It's not the most perfect game I've ever played in my life.
Right.
So with that, although I tell you what, I would totally be fine if they released some kind of DLC pack to just put that dude's voice on my computer and have him narrate. And he's like, Jeff opened up Adobe Premiere and hit the edit button.
Jeff reached for his phone. It wasn't ringing.
And now, you have something more.